Once upon a time, I used to run marathons. I wasn't the fastest runner, but I loved the challenge. Running long distances made my heart beat fast and sweat drip down my face. It felt like my lungs and legs were on fire, but I kept going. Running marathons is tough, but people talk about feeling really good when they run a lot. For me, it was more about pushing myself to keep going, no matter how tired I got. One marathon I did was in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. It's a place with lots of trees and not many people around. It was different from other places I'd run because there were parts where you could see houses and roads, but then suddenly you'd be in the middle of nowhere. During that race, something strange happened. It wasn't during the race itself, but it was still really memorable. The race I joined was in a special place, not like the usual races in the city. That's what made it interesting to me. Plus, I had hurt my knee before, so I thought running on softer ground would be better for me than hard pavement. But let's talk about the race. The day of the race was sunny and hot, just like a summer day should be. Some of the other runners were talking about a story called the Jersey Devil, a spooky tale from around there. They were just joking, trying to relax before the race started. When the race began, it was like any other marathon, people cheering, shoes pounding the ground, and everyone breathing hard. But as I ran deeper into the forest, there were fewer and fewer people around. The Pine Barrens were so quiet and peaceful. The trees were all twisted and the paths curved in strange ways. It felt like I was in a whole different world, mysterious and silent. Sometimes another runner would pass by and smile or give me a thumbs up, but most of the time it was just me, my breath, and the sound of my shoes on the ground. As I kept running and the other runners disappeared, I found myself alone on the trail. Now, I've run in forests and on trails many times, but this felt different. It was so quiet and still, it made me feel a little uneasy. There was a sharp, funny smell in the air like sulfur. At first I thought maybe I was just tired and imagining things. But the smell didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger the further I ran into the forest. It was so strong I couldn't ignore it anymore. Then I heard something strange. Noises that didn't sound like anything I've heard in a normal forest. They weren't like the usual sounds of leaves rustling or animals moving around. They were weird, almost like animal noises, but not quite. I tried to ignore them and focus on running, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being uncomfortable. Everything seemed okay, or as okay as it could be when you're really pushing yourself hard, until I saw something strange. It was standing right there, outlined by the setting sun, not far from the trail I was supposed to be on. This wasn't just another runner who got lost. This was something big and scary. At first I thought maybe I was just tired and starting to see things. So I kept running, hoping it would disappear, but as I got closer, I realized it was definitely real and definitely not human. It was huge, like a small tree, and its body looked like a mix between a skeleton and a lizard. Its shiny scales reflected the sunlight, and its wings looked like a bat's, making it even scarier. But the scariest part was its head. It was like something out of a scary story. It had eyes that glowed bright red, like they were staring right into my soul. And its mouth, its mouth was terrifying. It looked like a mix between a goblin and a horse, with a tongue that flickered out like a snake's. Just looking at it made me feel sick. I was so scared. I couldn't move. The creature turned its head and looked at the other runners with its glowing red eyes. It seemed like it understood what was going on, like it was enjoying scaring everyone. That's when I remembered the smell of sulfur. It wasn't just me being tired. It was definitely coming from the creature. My body suddenly felt full of energy. I ran faster than I ever had before, fueled by fear. I just wanted to get away from that thing. Finally, I caught up with the other runners. When I saw the crowd cheering at the finish line, it felt like I had escaped from a nightmare. But even though I was back in the race, I couldn't forget about the creature. Its image was stuck in my mind, like when you look at the sun for too long and see spots. Once I was back in the middle of the crowd, I looked back towards the forest, half expecting to see the creature again, but there was nothing there. I felt relieved but also confused. Had I been so tired and scared that I imagined seeing the Jersey Devil? When I got my medal for finishing the marathon, I felt shaky. It wasn't because I was tired, but because I was still scared. That image of the devil-like figure stayed in my mind. Now, when I think about it, I'm not sure what to believe. Was it really the Jersey Devil, or just someone playing a trick on us? Or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills. It reminds me that sometimes the scariest challenges aren't physical, but mental ones that stay with you long after the race is over. From the time I was a teenager, I dreamed of joining the Coast Guard. After I finished high school, I enlisted to make that dream come true. My station was on the northern Oregon coast, in the Tillamook Bay area. Looking back, I realize I was full of youthful energy then. Being in the Coast Guard was exciting, but I also cherished my free time. Whenever I had a weekend off, I loved to explore the area. Since I wasn't from Oregon, everything was fresh and new to me. One weekend, a bunch of us decided to visit a beach that some of my friends hadn't seen before. That night, there were 4 of us, 2 guys and 2 girls. We weren't exactly couples, we were just hanging out together. When we reached the beach, we decided to make a small bonfire, although I wasn't sure if it was allowed. Our plan was to camp out, or really just stay there all night, near some dunes. Although it was chilly, the fire felt wonderful. We had chosen a spot that was kind of out of the way, so we didn't expect to see many people. Hopefully, we wouldn't see anyone at all. The night turned out to be really dark. There were a few houses a little way off, but all their lights were out. All we could see were 2 street lamps in the distance. We had been sitting there for hours when the other pair went to get more blankets from the car. The car was parked just on the other side of a sand dune, a bit out of sight. It was probably about 3 in the morning when this happened. I was lying next to the fire on my sleeping bag when I heard a high-pitched yelping noise. It seemed to be getting louder and scarier. The yelp turned into a screech, which sounded really alarming. At first, we thought it might be an animal, but then it started sounding more like a person. Both of us by the fire jumped up, thinking maybe it was our friends at the car. We dashed toward them and met them at the sand dune just as they were coming back to us. They had heard the screeching noise too and thought maybe one of us had gotten hurt. We could still hear the noises coming from some nearby trees and wondered if it was a good idea to check it out. Trying to figure out where the scream was coming from was tough. It seemed like it was coming from all around us, and the noise of the ocean made it even harder to pinpoint. Plus, it was really dark. Once the screeching stopped, we decided to head back to our campsite. We didn't use our lights because we didn't want anyone to see where we were. We had only gone a few yards when we heard a deep cough. We all froze. Even though we couldn't see anything, we could hear shuffling noises too. We stayed hidden in the bushes until we heard what sounded like something being dragged across the sand. It was really spooky. At that moment, I started imagining all sorts of scary things that could be happening out there in the dark. When we heard the cough again, I felt like running away. Just as we were about to turn around, this massive creature emerged from between 2 trees. It was definitely not something you see every day. The creature stood upright and was really tall. I quickly turned on my tactical flashlight to get a better look. We needed to know what we were dealing with. It was covered in reddish-brown hair and looked completely drenched. It was like seeing a giant, maybe even a Neanderthal or something. We just stood there staring at it in shock. Its brow ridge was heavy, and its lips were prominent. Despite my bright light shining on it, it kept staring in our direction with its small black eyes. It had a firm grip on a large animal, which must have been what we heard being dragged. From what I could see, the creature was holding on to what looked like a dead sea lion. It seemed like it had been hunting out in the ocean. As soon as I shone my light on it, the creature let out a loud bellow. That's when all of us turned around at the same time and ran as fast as we could away from there. We jumped into the car and drove up the road towards where there were a few houses and streetlights. We parked there and just sat under the light. We thought that if we stayed near the streetlights, we would be able to see the creature if it decided to follow us. We were really scared, and we kept coming up with different ideas about what that thing could have been. We couldn't believe it, But the closest thing we could think of was that the creature looked like what people imagine Bigfoot to be like. But we all had the same question. How could that be possible? Bigfoot was always talked about in deep forests, not by the ocean. It seemed unbelievable to think that we might have seen one that had been out hunting in the ocean. We stayed in the car until sunrise. It was already about 4 o'clock in the morning anyway, so it was just for an hour or two. The whole time we kept our eyes peeled for any sign of movement, any indication that it might be nearby. When daylight finally broke, we went back to the beach to make sure the fire was out and then hurried away from there. I felt like I had to report what we saw to my chief petty officer. He asked me a lot of questions, and I told him everything I could remember. His reaction was pretty calm, and I couldn't really tell what he was thinking, but I felt like I had done my duty, and now they could decide if they needed to investigate further. For a while after that, I kept a close watch on the news, but there was never any report about what we saw. Working with the United States Forest Service in the Blood Mountain Wilderness was my job. It's a big wilderness area in Georgia where part of the Appalachian Trail runs. Keeping it nice for visitors is important, even though some parts can be rough. We've got lots of black bears around, so we always keep an eye out for them. This story happened in the late 90s. Back then, we were getting reports about black bears bothering campers who were spread out, even though they were being careful. So I decided to do some night patrols to see if I could find the bear causing trouble. One night, as I was driving along one of the park's roads, I noticed something moving in the ditch. It looked like the shape of a bear, and it seemed really interested in something down there. I decided to shine my spotlight on it to get a better look. I couldn't see its face, just its back, but I could tell it was munching on something. It looked like it might have been a deer carcass, but I couldn't be sure from where I was sitting. Staying safe in my vehicle, I decided to try scaring the animal away. Bears can be pretty fierce, especially when food is involved, and we weren't far from where campers usually stayed. So I rolled down my window and started making a lot of noise. I screamed, honked my horn, and waved my light around, hoping to scare it off. But no matter what I did, the animal didn't seem bothered at all. I remembered I had a signal flare in my truck, so I grabbed it, lit it up, and threw it towards what I thought was a big black bear. When the flare hit the animal's back, it finally turned around. And guess what? It wasn't a bear. It was a wolf. A huge black wolf. The light from the flare made its face glow red, and I could see it clearly for the first time. This wolf was enormous, as big as a grown-up black bear, maybe even bigger. Its eyes were a strange yellowish color, like amber, and its teeth looked huge, almost too big for its mouth. It reminded me of those ancient creatures you read about in books about the Ice Age. I definitely made that wolf angry. It stared right at me through the window, and no matter how much I honked the horn, it didn't seem to care. I quickly rolled up my window, but instead of going to the driver's side like I expected, the wolf walked right in front of my truck. This wolf was already big, but now it looked enormous, standing there like it was challenging me to do something. It was as if hitting it would be like hitting an elk. I knew my truck wouldn't stand a chance against that kind of impact, and I think the wolf knew it too. I knew I had to get out of there, but the wolf was blocking the road, so I slammed the truck into reverse and spun around as fast as I could, but the wolf didn't move an inch. I kept my eyes on it the whole time through the mirror. But here's the strange part, as if seeing a giant wolf wasn't enough. As I drove away, I saw it in my rearview mirror standing up on its hind legs, just like a bear. When I finally made it back to the ranger station, I locked myself inside and called my supervisor. But when I told him about the wolf, he didn't believe me. He thought maybe I was just tired and mistook it for a bear or a stray dog. I couldn't blame him. It did sound pretty crazy, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear or just some stray dog. After that scary encounter, driving home that night was nerve-wracking. I couldn't even bring myself to look out the window at the forests. I was so scared that I might catch a glimpse of that creature's face out there. Somehow, I made it back to the safety of my house, but sleep was out of the question. I stayed wide awake all night, too afraid to close my eyes. The next morning I went back to the ranger station, still shaken from the events of the night before, but what I found there was even more terrifying. All around the station's perimeter were these huge footprints. They were wolf footprints, but they were as big as a bear's. It sent shivers down my spine to think that the creature had followed me all the way back home. When my supervisor arrived at the station, I showed him the prints, hoping he would believe me, but instead, he accused me of pulling off some kind of elaborate prank. He thought the prints looked like they belonged to a canine, but they were way too big. I tried to track where the creature had gone, but it had covered its tracks well. It was like it wanted me to know it had been there, but it didn't want me to know where it had disappeared to. That mysterious creature still haunts my thoughts to this day. Once upon a time, I thought nothing bad could happen to me, like I was invincible, you know? When you're young, you sometimes feel like nothing can touch you. I believed my body was strong and my job was secure. I thought bad things only happened to others, but boy, was I wrong. Let me tell you about what happened to me in Portland, Oregon. It all started when I lost my job, and it was really sad. A lot of us got laid off, and I was one of them. Some people found new jobs, but not me. Suddenly, everything I had was gone, and I didn't know what to do. I ended up homeless, just like that. But this isn't a story about jobs and money. It's about what I saw while living on the streets. I made a little shelter for myself under a bridge. It wasn't fancy, just some cardboard and old blankets. Not the best place to live, but I had to make do. Every night after searching through trash cans for food, I'd go back there to sleep. I tried to ignore the dirt and noise of the city and told myself it was only temporary. That's how I got through each day. As I lay there under the bridge, I often gazed at the old factory spires on the edge of town. They stood tall and quiet, reminding me of the days when I used to work there. But dreaming about those times felt like a luxury I couldn't afford at that moment. Then one night, everything changed. The city suddenly fell silent, as if it had lost its voice. I felt a strange sensation creeping over me, so I cautiously peered out into the darkness. That's when I saw it. This creature appeared out of nowhere. It was massive, with wings resembling those of a moth. Its eyes glowed red, piercing through the darkness and fixing on me. I tell you, I was terrified beyond belief. As it moved closer, I could feel the air around it becoming charged with an eerie energy. It seemed like the whole world was bending to its will. When it looked at me, I felt a sensation similar to seeing roadkill on the street, only this time I was the helpless one. I felt frozen, unable to move or even breathe properly. Pressed against the bridge, I sensed the heavy air as the creature unfurled its wings. Then it emitted a piercing screech that reverberated through everything, causing my makeshift shelter to collapse. Pure instinct took over, propelling me into a frantic sprint. The creature wasn't exactly chasing me. It was more like it was engulfing everything in its path. The familiar streets of my city were transforming into a scene from a nightmare. I darted through alleys, desperately trying to shake off the creature's pursuit, but it seemed to be playing with me, toying with my attempts to escape. The neon lights flickered ominously as I raced past, a feeling of dread settling over me. I knew deep down that I couldn't outrun it, but I had to keep trying. I stumbled upon an old factory, its dilapidated structure like a fading memory. Despite the familiar sights of cold metal and rust, it felt strangely alien to me. I searched desperately for any form of shelter, any means of escape from the looming threat behind me. Even within the factory's confines, I could still hear it. The creature's wings, its footsteps, everything reverberating through the darkness. How could I have ever believed I was safe from such horrors? Climbing a set of stairs in a panic, I sought refuge on the upper floors, yet the creature persisted in its pursuit. At the pinnacle, standing on a narrow ledge, I realized I was trapped. It dawned on me that perhaps there was no escape from this nightmare. Facing the creature head-on, it let out another deafening screech. The entire building trembled as if on the verge of collapse. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, disaster struck. I lost my footing and plummeted into the unknown depths below. The next thing I remember, I'm waking up in a hospital bed. Relatives I hadn't seen in a long time were gathered around, peering down at me with worried expressions. The cops and the doctors thought I had tried to hurt myself. They couldn't grasp what had truly occurred that terrifying night. But that night changed everything for me. I no longer live on the streets. Some kind social workers helped me, and now I have a job again. From what most people can see, I'm doing all right. Yet there's this lingering fear inside me, a fear of the darkness and the night. I still believe that creature is out there somewhere, waiting. Who's to say it won't return for me? Maybe it sounds silly, but I can't shake the thoughts my brain keeps throwing at me. Sharing my story here might help me cope. Have you ever felt a shiver crawl up your back because you stumbled upon something mysterious? Well, get ready, because today we're diving deep into Acadia National Park. Let's journey into a tale that blurs the lines between what's real and what's just a story. This is about Brittany, a wildlife expert who found herself tangled in a mystery. It's not just any mystery, though. It involves a moose, but not your ordinary moose. Are you all set? Great, let's uncover the secrets of Acadia's phantom moose together. I promise, you won't guess the ending. On a foggy morning, Brittany ventured out into the park, and each step sank her boots into the squishy ground below. For weeks, reports had been streaming in. People had seen a moose that didn't quite seem normal. Some said it passed through trees like they weren't even there. Others swore its eyes glowed in the dim light. Brittany, a wildlife expert with heaps of experience in Acadia, thought it might be tricks of the light. You see, moose were common in Maine, but not so much in Acadia, mainly because most of it sits on an island. On that day, Brittany ventured into the part of the park where most sightings had been reported. The air felt crisp, and her breath made little clouds in the morning mist. She checked her gear, camera, notebook, and her grandfather's old binoculars, which she never left behind. She always said they were lucky. The park was coming alive. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, but the usual sounds felt distant. Brittany pushed aside the strange feeling and focused on her task, figuring out what everyone was seeing. She'd marked out the sightings on her map and planned to follow the trail that linked them. Hours slipped by, and she only spotted regular moose nibbling on willow branches. But as the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over everything, Brittany sensed something peculiar. The hairs on her neck prickled, and she grabbed her grandfather's binoculars, scanning the tree line intently. And just as she anticipated, there it appeared. A moose, but unlike any she'd ever laid eyes on. Its shape seemed blurry, like the wavy lines that dance above hot roads, and it moved with an eerie smoothness. It didn't exactly walk through trees. Instead, it almost glided past them, its figure shimmering whenever it passed a trunk. Brittany's heart thumped loudly, and she scrambled for her camera, desperate to capture evidence of this extraordinary sight. The moose halted, and for a brief moment, Brittany wondered if it sensed her presence. Its eyes, just as described in the reports, glowed with an otherworldly light. For what felt like 5 or 10 minutes, the moose lingered, then slowly meandered into the woods, fading away as if it were gradually becoming invisible. Brittany was left with a profound sense of confusion and the feeling that she'd witnessed something truly remarkable. It was undeniable. The reports were accurate. There was indeed a peculiar creature wandering through Acadia. In the days that followed, Brittany delved deep into the park's history. She discovered tales of the indigenous people who once lived on these lands, stories of settlers who arrived later, and the efforts to protect and preserve this beautiful place, turning it into a national park. Among these stories were legends of spirit animals, guardians of the land and its people. None of these stories precisely matched what she'd witnessed, but together they formed a rich tapestry that felt oddly relevant. Every day for a week, at both dawn and dusk, Brittany returned to the same spot. Twice more the moose made its appearance, each time as elusive as the first. Brittany started to believe that this creature wasn't a mere anomaly. She felt it was as much a part of Acadia as the rocks, trees, and waters that filled the landscape. She consulted with park rangers, local historians, and even spoke with visitors who claimed to have glimpsed the mysterious moose. While everyone had their own theories, it was an elderly man, a member of the Wabanaki Confederacy, who provided the missing piece of the puzzle. "Land remembers," he explained over cups of strong tea. "It holds the memories of all who tread upon it. Sometimes it reveals those memories to us, but only if it deems us worthy." Brittany pondered his words. Was she meant to witness the moose? She couldn't be sure, but she felt grateful for the experience. As she continued her work in the park, she carried the tale of the moose with her, sharing it with anyone who would listen, weaving it into the fabric of Acadia's lore. Though the moose never graced her with its presence again, sometimes in the perfect light, she sensed something majestic and elusive. It served as a gentle reminder that confusion and awe often walked hand in hand, and she felt privileged to be a part of it all.